Good evening, Mayor, members of the council. Thank you for your time tonight. Just a brief presentation overview of PFAS and how it impacts our community public water supply. What are PFAS? PFAS, or polyfluoroalkyl substances, are a group of man-made chemicals also known as forever chemicals, manufactured and utilized in cookware, food packaging, personal care products, clothing, furniture, and firefighting foam. Firefighting foam. So this has been around since the early 1940s. PFAS spreads easily, breaks down very slowly, and has been linked to potential health effects according to the US EPA, CDC, and various health studies. How do you remove PFAS? There are 3 known treatment processes to date. One is granular activated carbon filters. 2 is reverse osmosis systems. The 3rd is ion exchange treatment. And through preliminary research, most cost effective for long term is granular activated carbon, which we call GAC filters. What are we doing about them? We have been completing mandatory and elective testing since November of 2020. These test results, 5 of our 6 wells produced finished tap water with no detectable PFAS levels. The 6th well, number 15, was removed from regular service on September of 24 to minimize the potential exposure to our public supply. More details on PFAS on our PFAS report are posted on our Water Department website. I will pass along the testing analysis to our Chief Operator, Michael Crawford.
Good evening, Mayor, members of council. So like Bill just said, we've done a mix of both mandatory and elective testing at all 6 points of our groundwater well sources and at the finished water leaving our plant. Some all at the same time, sometimes it's just finished. These tests about 5 years ago in 2020 and up until now, the methods have changed a few times. The technology for the tests is relatively in its infancy. There are thousands of known PFAS chemicals, and as to my current knowledge, testing can only detect about 30 of these compounds and measure their values. So the EPA in 2024 released its final verdict on which of the measurable compounds that they're going to begin regulation on in 2029. And so our tests tested a number of compounds beyond these, but these are the ones we're focusing on because these are the ones that the EPA has deemed important for tracking health outcomes. What we've discovered is that in all 6 of our groundwater wells, we've unfortunately tested positive to some degree. Some of our wells test below the upcoming regulations, and one of our wells in particular tests very, very much above one of those upcoming regulations. This slide right here shows all of our finished water tests. So this is the water that's been treated by the treatment plant, and it's tested as it leaves the facility into the distribution system. In the second column there, it tells you which wells were active at that time, so which source water was responsible for that finished water product. And the pattern is pretty clear. You can see with combinations of 11, 11 and 14, 8 and 14, the tests at those dates came back with no detectable levels of PFAS in that finished product. But as you can see in 2 tests in 2021 and a recent test in late 2024, as soon as well 15 is in the mix, suddenly we have PFAS being detected, and it's being detected at levels above the upcoming regulations, which you'll see in that bottom row there, called maximum contaminant levels, or MCLs. Go ahead and next slide me. So this is a single test slide from I believe May in 2021. with just some well data on it. There's far more well tests available on the Collinsville website. There's a 10-page report that anyone can access, download and print out for their information. The overall lesson we've learned is that wells 8 and 11 typically test almost non-detect if they test positive at all, whereas wells 9, 12, and 14 typically register some small amount of PFAS. But however, when we compare that to our finished water testing, the water then goes through the treatment process. When we have combinations of the wells that aren't well 15, the finished water comes back successfully with no detections of PFAS. We're going to continue to do elective testing. Mandatory PFAS testing has not been implemented yet, but it will be coming up with the new regulations in 2029. And it'll be similar to other testing methods for other compounds, the frequency of which will be based on how much has been detected in your water system's previous history. So we will probably be in an accelerated testing path because we have hits in all of our sources. So now that we know that, now that we know we have PFAS in the source water, what are we doing about it? So for a while now, we've been in conversations with distributors, manufacturers, engineers, and other operators in understanding what treatment options are available to us at our scale, because we're a large scale. Right now, we already have an engineering firm looking into a preliminary study on which of the 3 known PFAS treatment options, which Bill covered a moment ago, the granular activated carbon, the reverse osmosis, and the ionic exchange removal systems. We have a strong inclination that the granular activated carbon is going to be what fits our specific application, but the engineers are going to confirm that for us. We have a rough timeline to where we're looking to be operational by February of 2029, complete installation, trial period, and running by February of 2029. The regulations become live and enforceable in April of 2029. Right now, because we have removed well 15, all test results indicate that there is no harm in drinking our tap water. All those test results that do not include well 15 show levels below the upcoming limits, and most of our finished water tests do not detect PFAS of any level. Yeah.
So how are we comparing to other communities? This was a snapshot in time from 2020/2021 when everyone was doing their initial tests. There have been more communities that have tested positive, but this was on the IEPA's website from 2020 and 2021. So other communities testing above the new standards that are being that are going to go into effect in 2029 was American Water in East St. Louis, East Alton, and Wood River. Other communities that tested positive during that same time period were American Water's Alton facility, Bethalto, Dupo, Edwardsville, and Granite City. So there have been others that have tested positive outside of this. I just didn't have a good record source of what their levels were and how they compared. If you shows in here in the little graphs, it just shows how much of the state has tested positive, and some of these sources are also surface water, and the rules are not going in on surface water now. They're doing groundwater first, and then surface water will follow, from what we've been told. And then over here in the bottom is number of confirmed detections by the chemical, and this is throughout the state of Illinois. A lot of them are up in the northeast Chicago area, but primarily most of the positive tests have been surface water. With that, we just want to open this up to any questions you guys might have, any concerns. figured we'd be here just to, any questions we might not have answered in this presentation, we're here to answer.
Is there anything in our water process and treatment now that does anything to remove them currently?
So our current treatment processes are not specialized to remove this kind of chemical. This kind of chemical by human design was supposed to be, very unreactive, very small, very robust, and it just doesn't react with a lot of things. So it requires a very specialized media in order to attract and grab these compounds and remove them from the water. Our current filtration process just is not designed to handle particles of this shape and size and scale.
Technology hasn't caught up yet.
Not necessarily. GAC has been around a really long time, so is ionic exchange and reverse osmosis, but it's not typically necessary in groundwater up until this new information of this emerging contaminant has finally come to light and whatnot. The EPA is constantly there's a program called the Unregulated Monitoring Program, and they're tracking compounds that are showing up that they're finding in source waters all across the nation all the time, and doing studies on them and trying to determine if they're a threat to public health. And so this was one of those compounds in that, or this was a group of compounds in those studies, and the upcoming regulations are based on that. But water plant design up until now, because these regulations didn't exist, because the data wasn't there, because the EPA didn't have an official position until last year, these technologies aren't considered because traditional filtration methods have lower startup costs and cheaper operational costs over time. So it would have been, at the time when the plant was designed, it would have been an overcost for no reason.
Any other comments or questions?
So I assume in 2029 that there's a financial penalty if we're above the acceptable level?
Yeah, I couldn't tell you exactly what those are, but I can speak to what other EPA penalties are, and they can include daily fines. And if they come down on it with a daily fine, then that can get really expensive very quickly. Luckily, there are companies that we've talked to that just in case, like, we have a difficult time actually meeting that deadline of February 2029, April 2029 by the latest. There are companies that, for an expense, can bring out large trucks with mobile specialized treatment systems that we can hook up and use to distribute through. We don't want to go that route because that's more expensive in operation and rental. But if we have to do that, it would probably be cheaper than whatever fine would come our way from the EPA in 2029.
And just right as now, we're meeting the limits as long as we don't have well 15 involved, correct?
Correct.
Yeah.
Now, that could change in the future, right? So no matter if you put a new well in, no matter if your wells are non-detect right now, in 2 weeks from now, you can get a detect. You can be above the MCL. So this is why the system has to be redesigned.
On that point, we just don't know how PFAS got into our aquifer. We don't know from which direction, from which industry. That's really hard to say. And because of that, we don't know if more is coming down the pipeline or if this was a one-time contamination, but but like many contaminations, it's going to be with us for a long time. And we don't know, eventually we're going to have to take our current wells out of service and replace them with newer wells. 2 of our wells are still have been operational for 70 years. And eventually we're going to have to fill and cap those and drill new ones. And that is going to be a gamble. We won't know if we're going to hit a pocket of PFAS. So even though the question's been posed, why would we invest in PFAS removal if with 5 of our 6 wells, we've so far tested absolutely negative on PFAS? Well, we need to prepare for the future because we don't know how we got it, We don't know if we're getting more, and we don't know if we're going to get more in the future. So,
So you had mentioned that you're leaning towards the granular activated carbon system.
Yes.
So just like literally just Googling it right now, it's less efficient, it says, at removing like all PFAS, and the reverse osmosis is the most effective. So
yes.
why would we go with one that's like less effective?
Sure. So the startup cost of RO is much, much higher. And RO also has unintended other side effects to our water treatment. So one of the things that we have to be careful of when distributing water through a distribution system made of a bunch of other metals is we need to make sure our water is what we call stable and not corrosive or leaching. RO strips water of its stability and can cause it to be corrosive. RO is a very complete nanoscale filtration technology. If we did RO, we would have to install other treatment processes to replace some of the components in the water and the chemical properties that we've lost. So ultimately, that means more bulk chemicals to, supplement that, and more electricity for the motors and the feed pumps, and it would be a much bigger retrofit with several other systems. RO is by far the bottom candidate as far as we're concerned because of the impact it would have on our water elsewhere other than PFAS. The ionic exchange system, that works a lot like almost identically to the granular activated carbon system. However, the resin material itself has a zero tolerance to our disinfectant chemical. So it would be, again, an example of we could do the resin exchange, but we'd have to install another system to remove our disinfectant, our pre-fed disinfectant, before sending it through the ion exchange, or else it would just literally eat the media, which is expensive. Adding another system to supplement another system, it's more startup costs, and it'd be another chemical. It'd be a chemical we would feed to remove the disinfectant. And then we would have to, after that system, put all that disinfectant back in there. So we'd be double feeding disinfectant. The granular activated carbon can tolerate our disinfectant at the levels that it would be receiving the water at that stage in the treatment process. We've spoken with engineers and other distributors, manufacturers, and of granular activated carbon systems, and we've gone over our results and how much we're seeing in our finished water, and we've been assured by those experts that even granular activated carbon with its lower efficiency would remove us down to a non-detect level.
All right, thank you.
How average depth of our wells?
Between 98 and 102 feet.
And within that aquifer, I assume that's all the same aquifer that those wells are tapping?
Yes.
How long does it take for rain groundwater to reach an aquifer in your estimation?
I actually couldn't tell you that. I don't know that information, I'm sorry.
Okay. It's not overnight. I assume.
No, and it can travel from, I can tell you that it can come from a very far distance, because our American Bottoms aquifer is fed from every river and stream that eventually empties into the Mississippi, which goes out as far east as eastern Pennsylvania and as far west as Idaho. So we get water from all over the country that comes in and feeds our aquifer.
Okay.
This has been way more fascinating than I ever thought it was going to be. I've actually enjoyed this one way better than anything we talk about at the sewage treatment plant. So this has been good. I will tell you that I mean, we have a very professional water department. I know when we moved here a long time ago, our water is not what it is today. It was much more corrosive, and taste was not good. I drink about all I drink, and our water is great, and I really appreciate all that you guys put into it. The only thing I wanted to say is maybe a month or so ago, there was a letter sent out that caused quite a stir amongst our residents. And that's partly why, we want to be transparent, right? The letter kind of made it sound like we're not. So could you guys address the letter, where it came from, and then why
Yes.
Put us in a reactive position. It's not where we want to be, because we want
I
to be
would be,
transparent.
I would be happy to address that letter.
Thank you.
So, that letter, oh gosh, where do we even start with it? So that letter, if you look at it specifically, it talks about groundwater directly. It's not talking about the finished water product. It's coming from the IEPA. It sounds like, it made it sound like it was a finished drinking water issue, but it's actually an environmental notice more than anything, like the groundwater is contaminated, which is true. The, we were really blindsided by this as well, to be completely transparent about it. There is a statute, there's a law in the EPA called the Right to Know Act. It's an act. There we go, the act. Looking for that word. There's an act in the EPA, the Right to Know Act, and that was triggered when the groundwater standards were updated in April of this year. Once the new standard existed, our groundwater tests, which there were no standards before, and then suddenly there were standards, and we had already done tests, and our tests were above those standards. So the Right to Know Act triggered, and the EPA was required to write that letter. And then they had 5 days to write it, and 5 business days to write it and send it to us. And then we had 5 business days to mail it out to every service connection account owner. We had no notice, we had a 5-day notice. Due to that act, the Right to Know Act, we were not allowed to edit that letter in any way, which is why there was also big confusion because everybody got a letter addressed to me. We also had to include the letter explaining what the letter was and how to mail it out to everybody. Anyway, our hands were tied, we were just following the law. We couldn't even put a leaflet in the back to try to explain what it was. And the mailing was rather expensive as well. It was far beyond our postal budget for the water department. So we couldn't afford to turn around and do it again and send out another notice saying, hey, don't panic, here's what that means in non-legalese. So we did our best with low-cost tools, social media, the website. We had already done this PFAS report back in January, so we immediately made that available on the website. We took inspiration from Edwardsville's post on their social media, and so we did something similar and made that available the day that the letters went out to try to impact and try to, help supplement that letter. So that is essentially the story behind the letter. We did not write it, the EPA did. We only had 5 days to send it, and we could not modify it, so it's in the words of the EPA. So all we could do was react.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Thank you for clearing up some of those questions. And yeah, that was a shock, and a lot of people commented about it, but thrown into something. Probably one last question. Are we on the, I know Troy and Maryville also get their water from the bottoms. How do their wells, do you have any idea how their wells?
Well, so far, Troy hasn't tested their wells individually. They've only tested their finished water product. And as of, I think, late 2024 or earlier this year, they did finally detect a tiny amount of one of the 6 PFAS chemicals, but well below the upcoming limits. The interesting thing about, and some would say fascinating thing about groundwater is it's extremely consistent, but it's also, you could have 2 wells 10 feet apart and they could have completely different chemistries. And we see that in our current wells. So our well fields are relatively close, only a handful of miles apart, if that. But they got the luck of the draw, and so far they haven't found any in their finished product, and we did. So.
Yeah, I was just curious because actually Troy's is close to being in our city limits right
Yeah.
now by Moto. So.
Right.
All right, if there's no other questions or anything for that information,
Thank you.
move on.